Headliner Nation, back by popular demand in 2023. I think it's about time that we whisper to some tight ends. The football kind, of course. Yo, it is the most difficult position to figure out in fantasy football, and once again, Headliner Nation, you have entrusted me in helping you set your lineup weekly and trying to figure out what tight end to play. Now, if you haven't caught my running back start and sit show yet, that is going to detail the differences that you will find from our start and sit shows last season to this year, and I love the new layout, and when we talk about our first matchup, you're going to see it on screen. And just as a quick reminder, these start and sit shows are to help you try and identify what tight ends are going to have the best matchup for you this week. If you're stuck between a couple of guys that are listed in the green that look like they might be good starts, or you have a couple of guys that are super close together, don't forget when we drop our rankings videos on Thursday, it will help you answer those questions. It's high time that we jump into it though, and let's talk about Thursday night football with Detroit in Kansas City. Now, unfortunately, if you spend a first-round pick on Travis Kelce, you're probably heading into week one without your first-round pick. And you probably didn't even draft a backup tight end either, because why? You have Travis Kelce. Well, now you're going to be scrambling. The good news is that Travis Kelce's hyperextended knee doesn't appear to have any damage to the ACL. As of this recording, anything could change, who knows? Now, I think one question is going to be, do you grab Noah Gray, who is the backup to Travis Kelce? You could if you want to, but I'm probably going to look to see what other options are out there. Kind of like the other tight end in this matchup, Sam Laporta. Now, I like Sam Laporta. I think he's going to be a fantastic player at the NFL level, but I also know that very rarely does a rookie tight end offer any type of fantasy relevant output. But here in the first game of the season on the road against a high powered offense, Detroit might be throwing the ball a little bit more than what they plan on. And with that being said, Sam Laporta definitely could be in the area of maybe like 4 to 5 catches this week. And if he can have a bigger play, that could help out your fantasy roster. Now, it's also very possible that he gets buried behind Amon-Ra St. Brown, Jahmyr Gibbs. He doesn't end up seeing as many targets as like Marvin Jones. If something like that were to happen, then he doesn't become as relevant as we would like. But if you're looking for a last-minute replacement, I wouldn't hate Laporta either. And it also helps this week that there's no Jameson Williams, as he will be suspended all the way through week 6. So am I rushing to start Sam Laporta? No, I'm not. But if you're finding yourself in a bind this week with Travis Kelce being out, if Laporta's still available, you could take a shot on him. There's definitely a lot of risk with it, but we know that the game script could also offer a little bit of a reward. In fact, over on Underdog, Sam Laporta's pick'em is currently listed at 3 receptions. I would definitely take the higher there, because 4 to 5 receptions in a game of this magnitude is absolutely doable. And if you want to play alongside the headliners in Headliner Nation over on Underdog this season, make sure you download their app, create a new account, and deposit at least $10 using code word headliners. Underdog is going to match your deposit up to $100, and it's also going to unlock a super special pick'em that is almost guaranteed to hit. So make sure you take care of all of that before Thursday night football so you can jump in with us and hopefully bring home a little bit of cash this year. For the Carolina and Atlanta matchup, Hayden Hurst will be going up against his former team, now with his new team. And for Carolina, he definitely has an opportunity to play the safety blanket in this offense. Bryce Young is going to be looking for someone that he can connect with, and right now it looks like Adam Thielen. Jonathan Mingo's looked really good in training camp, and we know they're going to run the football. So how many realistic targets do we think Hayden Hurst has available to him? Not enough to make him a set-in-stone starter right now, but until we know a little bit more about how this offense is going to be structured, he's definitely a guy that will pique my interest. And while Kyle Pitts' name may be in green, there's nothing safe about him. But my hopes are, with a great run game in Bijan Robinson this year, Drake London on the other side, that Kyle Pitts, fully healthy, will finally have an opportunity to do what everyone's been waiting for since he was drafted out of Florida. Now, Carolina only allowed 8.3 fantasy points to opposing tight ends last year. But Kyle Pitts isn't your normal tight end. He's going to be lined up in the slot and he's going to be lined up outside. So that number is not something that I really factor into this. Really, what we need is we need a steady diet of targets. Kyle Pitts, if he can get 8 to 10 targets a game, solid. But if he's getting like 4 to 5 targets a game, we're going to have to hope for some big plays. And unfortunately, that's just not a whole lot of what Kyle Pitts' game evolves around. Same face, new place with Dalton Schultz in Houston. Kind of the same thing I mentioned with Hayden Hurst in Carolina. Dalton Schultz has an opportunity to become that safety blanket for CJ Stroud, but we'll have to see how much he really ends up being utilized. You've got some decent wide receiver options in Houston, but nobody that's set in stone and nobody that has really taken a grip of being the guy yet. So as we see this offense evolve, does it evolve with Dalton Schultz as a big part of it, or does it evolve with the wide receivers being the bigger part of it? Now, Houston's defense is slightly improved, but is it improved enough to slow down the new passing attack of the Baltimore Ravens? This is a team that we expect to go in the air a lot more than what we have seen in recent history. And the number one guy in that offense should end up being Mark Andrews. Him and Lamar Jackson have that connection. Now, the biggest thing this year is that there are more weapons around Mark Andrews. So maybe that does affect the volume a little bit for him. But if everyone around him can stay healthy, even if the volume comes down a little bit, he should see some insane efficiency. And if he goes from being second in tight end targets to like 5, is it really that big of a drop? Not really. I'm still buying into Mark Andrews and definitely going with him this week. Cincinnati and Cleveland is going to be the matchup of two ability monsters coming out of college that just haven't really showcased how high their ceiling could be. Now, for Irv Smith in Cincinnati, he is definitely a guy that I was okay taking a dart throw on later in drafts. He has the ability, he has the potential, and now he's in the perfect offense for it. He's not going to see a whole lot of coverage because, well, there's too many weapons to cover in Cincinnati, so he's going to have a lot of opportunity. But can he stay healthy and can he take advantage of the opportunity? Because when he hasn't been hurt, he's been inconsistent with drops and just poor performances. We'll see if Joe Burrow in Cincinnati can unlock that talent. And for David Njoku, at the beginning of 2022, it looked like the breakout was finally there. But unfortunately, an injury and then the return of Deshaun Watson kind of derailed that a little bit towards the end of the year. Now, Deshaun Watson, hopefully him and David Njoku have that connection. And I don't believe it's going to be the volume connection that I saw him have with Jacoby Brissett at the beginning of last season, but it's going to be more of a red zone connection. So David Njoku, even though I would love to see him get tons of volume, I don't think it happens. And I think we spend a lot of our time rooting for one touchdown in a game. Let's go ahead and say Evan Ingram had a re-breakout year last season. He was excellent as a rookie for New York and then didn't do a whole lot after that. He goes to Jacksonville and he becomes one of the best threats on that offense last season. But what are we going to look like this year with the addition of Calvin Ridley? And you still have Zay Jones, and you still have Christian Kirk, and you still have Travis Etienne. So how much volume will Evan Ingram really end up getting? And that's why I'm going to list him as a risky start this week, because we don't know the type of volume that Evan Ingram will get. Will he get the volume that we saw last season? Can we bank on anywhere between 7 and 9 targets a game? Or is he going to become touchdown dependent, and we're going to have to hope for that touchdown on a weekly basis? We'll have to really see where this offense goes with all of the weapons, and this week will be a step in the right direction for that. Now, for the Indianapolis Colts, they're essentially going to have the same 3 tight ends that they had last season, except Jelani Woods is starting the year on IR. So is it going to be my boy Mo Cox, Mo Problems, Mo Alley Cox, or is Kylen Granson going to be the starter? Right now, Granson is listed number 1 on the depth chart, but how much will Anthony Richardson end up using them? It looked like there might have been a little bit of a connection with Granson in the preseason and in training camp. We'll see if that comes to fruition. If it does, and he really locks into the starter role, I could see him becoming a top 15 option at some point this year. Tampa Bay is going to look a lot different with Baker Mayfield instead of Tom Brady being under center. And what does that mean for all the pass catching options? Cade Otton is a good tight end, and in the right offense, he might be looked at a little bit more. But when you've got guys like Chris Godwin and Mike Evans, it's really going to be hard to find consistent footing, especially if you still want to run the football. And if there's any inconsistencies with the offense, well, more inconsistencies than what we saw last season, that's only going to hurt Cade Otton. So for me right now, really, I'm just hoping for touchdowns with this guy. And if the volume comes, that's a little bit added extra. And for TJ Hockenson, the dude was just signed to a new massive contract. So Minnesota is going to use him. And after he was traded there last season, he was used consistently. So you know what? Lock in TJ Hockenson every single week. He will be one of the safest tight ends that we can get in our lineups. I really have been dreading talking about this matchup, and I'll explain more in a second, but starting with my boy Chiggy Oko from Tennessee. This is a guy that earlier in the preseason I was super high on, but then they added DeAndre Hopkins, and that's going to take away some of the volume that Chiggy Oko potentially was set up for. So we're going to have to hope for some huge efficiency from him and what will already be a run-heavy offense. If they can get a little bit more balance, that will be good. But if not, there's going to be some weeks where Chiggy Oko hits. There's going to be some weeks where you really are thinking of, should I just drop him now? All right, and here's why I'm dreading talking about this matchup, because for another season, I have to put Taysom Hill in tight ends, and I don't agree with it. And really, any platform out there that has him listed as a tight end, I really think is doing a disservice to the fantasy community. Taysom Hill is listed as a quarterback. That is where he is at on the depth chart right now. Putting this guy in our lineup on a weekly basis, if you want to do it, then go for it. But he doesn't accumulate any stats that a tight end normally would. Taysom Hill is getting his stats essentially from running the football. And maybe he has a trick play or two where he ends up throwing it. So if you're putting him in as a tight end, yeah, absolutely. He could end up winning a week for you like he did last season. But that's the problem. In every week that you ended up starting him last season, he burnt you a majority of the time. There was really only 4 weeks last year that you started Taysom Hill that he didn't completely botch the tight end position for you. So if you're going to start Taysom Hill, you're on your own with it. It's going to be a risk every single week. My boy Juwan Johnson, I really hope that they utilize him in the red zone the same way that they did last season. If they do, he's got 10 touchdown potential all over him. But this is the guy that will actually get the counting stats that we want at the tight end position. So honestly, my better bet here is going with Juwan Johnson and not worrying about Taysom Hill. But I know some of you truthers out there are going to say, whatever, I know best, and you're going to put him in your lineup anyway. San Francisco and Pittsburgh both did a really good job last season of limiting fantasy points to tight ends. But unfortunately, right before I started recording this video, it did come out that George Kittle could end up missing week 1. That's really tough to stomach, especially for those of you that risked another draft pick on him this season. But hopefully it's short-lived like last year. He comes back and he plays every game the rest of the season. So for now, no George Kittle, because I don't know if he's even going to start yet or not, and we'll address it in the rankings video. But for Pittsburgh, Pat Freiermuth, he was a beacon of light for Kenny Pickett last year. If Kenny Pickett needed somebody, typically it was Pat Freiermuth that he was going to. Now, George Pickens, I expect to take another step forward. I do expect Deontay Johnson to still see a lot of targets. They've added Allen Robinson. You've got Najee Harris in the backfield still. Jaylen Warren could see some more passing attempts this season. So we'll see how different things play out. So for Pat Freiermuth, like a lot of tight ends out there, he's going to be another risky start for me until I see for a fact that Kenny Pickett will still be going to his boy, the Muth. I'll be honest, there's not a whole lot to see here for Arizona and Washington, so I'm not even going to waste your time. For Arizona, Zach Ertz could end up playing this week after tearing his ACL last season. We'll see if he's back on the field, ready to go. If Trey McBride sees more snaps than him, we'll go through all of that. And Logan Thomas is a guy that has potential every single week. He's banged up a lot, though, and we'll see if Sam Howell, the new starter in Washington, will look his way quite a bit, or if we're going to be looking towards a lot of the other options like Antonio Gibson, Curtis Samuel, Jahan Dotson. Terry McLaurin obviously has been banged up as well, but Logan Thomas is like probably 5th on the pecking order in terms of targets right now for Washington. Green Bay and Chicago is going to bring a very interesting matchup, and Luke Musgrave is going to be someone I'm keeping a very close eye on this week. I mentioned it earlier, right, with Sam Laporta. Rookie tight ends very rarely do anything for you, especially in fantasy football. But Luke Musgrave is looking more and more like he could be an exception to the rule this season. Because when you see the notes coming out of Packers training camp and you look at the numbers, it is clear that they want to get him involved as much as possible. Now, does that mean it's going to happen? Absolutely not. But as Jordan Love grows and becomes more comfortable as the starter, he could be looking at Luke Musgrave to kind of be that go-to guy. And when you take a look at the weapons around him, they're not nearly as established as what you would like to see. Christian Watson was very up and down last season. Romeo Doubs was very up and down last season. Jayden Reed is going to be a guy that, he's still very, very raw in terms of a skill set. And you've got Aaron Jones catching passes. So I'm really looking forward to see what Luke Musgrave does this week and if he is actually going to be a guy that we can rely on. Now for Cole Kmet, the addition of DJ Moore will likely take away some of the targets that we may have hoped to see. But that is okay because they needed more weapons anyway. We couldn't expect Cole Kmet to be the guy on offense every single week. My hope is that even though it does take away some of the volume that we hoped for, that it really helps him in the red zone once again. And this is a guy that approaches 10 touchdowns this season. Now, when Justin Fields needed somebody last year, Cole Kmet was the guy. Does it become DJ Moore, or will Kmet still be the guy? If he does, thinking about 5 to 7 targets a week will still be a very real possibility with lots of touchdown upside to go with it. Whew, there's just a whole lot to question in this matchup between the Raiders and the Broncos. I mean, for the Raiders, you drafted Michael Mayer, but you got Austin Hooper listed as the starter right now. So does that really end up happening? Yikes for that guy. It doesn't get much better because instead of going with Greg Dulcich, who looked like to be a stud in the making at times last season, Sean Payton's going with his boy that used to be with him in New Orleans, and Adam the Fish Troutman. I really don't know what to expect from either of these tight end positions. And quite honestly, I'm just going to skip them all together this week. Maybe somebody ends up popping up over the next couple of weeks. Who knows? But if we're going to be playing games like this, well, they won't be playing any games in my lineup. Now, for the Dolphins and the Chargers, the Dolphins didn't even utilize Mike Gesicki last year, and now I expect them to utilize a dude by the name of Durham Smythe. Not happening. I'm not putting him anywhere near my lineup, and probably once again, he won't be utilized by Miami. And probably in the future, whenever I talk about the matchup that Miami is in, I'm probably skipping over Miami and going right to the opponent, because I don't really see any tight end making an impact for them this season. Now for the Chargers, this is way more interesting, and I've gotten probably more questions about Gerald Everett than really any other tight end this offseason. And a lot of people saw what he did last year, and they want to hop right back on the bandwagon. And I get that. I like Gerald Everett. He's actually a guy for a couple of years now. I've said, hey, he's got a lot of breakout potential. But there's an issue this year that we didn't face last year. Number one, Gerald Everett did have a good year, but Keenan Allen and Mike Williams were both banged up for a majority of the season. That led to a lot of extra potential for Gerald Everett. Number two, they now have added Quentin Johnston. So if you've got Quentin Johnston, you've still got Joshua Palmer on the outside, Keenan Allen and Mike Williams, plus Austin Eckler in the backfield. How often do we really think that Gerald Everett is going to be a fantasy viable wide receiver? Will the volume be there? Probably not. If you start Gerald Everett, honestly, you're just risking it for a touchdown. Philadelphia and New England are going to bring my Manscaped must-watch matchup of the week. Head on over to manscaped.com, use code word headliners, and when you check out, you're going to get 20% off your entire order and free shipping. Now, there's a couple of different things that I'm looking for in this game, and number one is Dallas Goedert. Keep in mind that Goedert was the dude for Jalen Hurts last season. At the beginning of the year, prior to his injury, he was getting tons of targets. A.J. Brown was the number one wide receiver, and Devontae Smith was a very distant and out-of-mind wide receiver 29 on the season. Now, Dallas Goedert goes down with an injury. Devontae Smith steps up. Him and A.J. Brown have a fantastic end of the year. Goedert does come back, but isn't fully healthy. So what is it going to look like now this season? And on top of that, you've added a guy like DeAndre Swift that can really help in the passing game. Is he going to see a lot of targets as well? Goedert is a little bit of a marginal risk for me this week. I still think that he's going to see some targets this week, but how much does he actually see, and what do we see from this offense as a whole? I'm going to be tracking it very closely. early. Now for New England though, Hunter Henry is my guy. He's been my sleeper tight end because he's got the most touchdown potential. And for Mike Gesicki, he's just not a guy that I've ever really liked. I mean, he kind of reminded me of like the Kyle Pitts hype when he came out. This uber athlete that was going to be a guy that was going to be a huge mismatch nightmare and could receive all over the field. And he's just never really broken out that potential. Could it be in New England? Absolutely. And we know Bill O'Brien's going to run 2 tight end sets. But all of the reports coming out of training camp was that when they got to the red zone, Mac Jones and Hunter Henry were absolutely connected. So Hunter Henry is going to be a little bit of a marginal risk for me as well this week. We'll see what happens. There is lots of questions to be answered in this matchup though. For the Rams and the Seahawks, I'm absolutely loving Tyler Higbee this week. This is a Seahawks defense that did not do well against tight ends last season. In fact, they allowed almost 15 fantasy points per game to opposing tight ends, which was the most in the NFL last year. Now, does that just automatically carry over to this year? Not exactly, but it is still a possibility of it happening. And with no Cooper Kupp, Tyler Higbee is likely going to be the number 2 on the offense this week behind Van Jefferson. Actually, he could end up being the number 1 with the most targets on the team as well. This is going to be really interesting this week, and I think Tyler Higbee sees more than enough targets that I actually have him listed as a safe start this week. So we'll hope that he gets there. I was hoping to do an underdog pick 'em as well for Tyler Higbee, but there isn't one out yet, so keep in mind on that because we might take the over no matter what it is. But for the Seahawks and Noah Fant, we know the dude he's a good tight end. He's a good receiving tight end. Unfortunately, he doesn't play in an offense that's really going to utilize his ability. So for Noah Fant, unless something were to blow up, especially given the fact that they've added JSN, not that that matters this week, I really don't see him being a fantasy contributor much this season. Jake Ferguson for the Dallas Cowboys will definitely be interesting to watch, especially considering Luke Schoonmaker, who they drafted in the 2nd round. Now, does Jake Ferguson become the breakout candidate that a lot of people think he does? Not necessarily, because again, you've got Schoonmaker, but you've added Brandon Cooks as well. You still have Tony Pollard in the backfield. Deuce Vaughn has shown himself to be a potential breakout candidate this year in the receiving game. So Jake Ferguson, I don't think necessarily takes the Dalton Schultz role that we saw over the last couple of years that made him fantasy reliable on a weekly basis. And for Darren Waller, I've got him listed as a safe start, even in a really tough matchup this week, because there's quite possibly the opportunity for Darren Waller to have the most targets on the New York Giants this week. And that could absolutely happen until somebody steps up as the number 1 wide receiver. You've got Darius Slayton, Isaiah Hodgins, and Jalen Hyatt. Are any of those guys capable of taking over? Possibly, but maybe not. And Darren Waller, just based on volume alone, should be a guy that we put in, even if the outcome doesn't end up being exactly what we want. The Buffalo Bills are going to be deploying one of the most unique 2 tight end sets in all of football, with Dalton Kincaid being in the slot and Dawson Knox playing his typical tight end position on the line. Now, there is a big opportunity for Kincaid to be the rookie tight end 1 and find himself in the top 12. But I'm going to caution everybody, and this is a Kyle Pitts story here. Remember a couple of years ago when Kyle Pitts came out and how he was going to revolutionize the tight end position, and it didn't happen? I feel like a lot of people are saying the same thing about Dalton Kincaid. Now, the big difference is that Kyle Pitts was the guy a couple of years ago when he came out. He was never going to win in that type of an environment. Dalton Kincaid does not have to be that guy. He's got Stephon Diggs. He's got Gabe Davis. You still have Dawson Knox. And you've got James Cook in the backfield. So the opportunity for more one-on-one matchups will absolutely be there. And that's why I'm a little bit more on board with Dalton Kincaid being a top 12 option than what I was a couple of years ago with Kyle Pitts. Now, Kyle Pitts still had a good year, but it never reached the size that people wanted it to. And he didn't return draft value either. Given where Dalton Kincaid's going, he's got a much better opportunity to return his investment. Now, Tyler Conklin's role in this offense is very confusing for me right now. Last year, he had like 2 good games, and that was it. And people chased that all season long. This year, now that you have Aaron Rodgers, people haven't really gone back to Tyler Conklin because you've got Garrett Wilson. They brought in Allen Lazard. And really what's going to happen in the backfield with like Breece Hall and Dalvin Cook, for me personally, I've got to stay away from Tyler Conklin right now until I really figure out how this offense is going to operate. And if Conklin is a guy that can either become a red zone threat or become a volume monster in between the 20s. Yo, Headliner Nation, there we have it. Week 1 start and sit tight ends in the book. Hit the like button for me. Hit the subscribe button if you're also new here, because I guarantee you're not going to want to miss our in-season content. And let me know down in the comments below, how do you like the new layout of the start and sit videos? This is the second one I did. I already did the running back one. It has been released. So if you're just coming across this and you missed running backs, go check that out. It's going to be actually right here below me in just a second to click on. But let me know in the comments what you think about the new layout. Headliner Nation, I'm going to get out of here for the week. Peace out. Stay safe. Stay healthy. And I'll catch you all on the next episode of the Fantasy Headliners.